Happy New Year and welcome to our first event of what we hope will be another great year. Very topically, our first event this year is on leadership. I think that's been in the news a little bit this week, but yeah, let's leave that for now. Many of you may be familiar faces, regular attendees at our events. Some of you may be here for the first time. So very quickly about us. My name is Chris. I am sadly still the president of UXPA UK, which means I've either been really good or really bad. We'll see how that goes. As an organisation, we have been going for 17 years supporting UX in the UK. We found out this week that the first meeting of the London Usability Group was in November 2000. So 20 years this kind of association has been building. We are run entirely by volunteers. We have Caroline, our new secretary. We have Christine, somewhere in the room. We have, who else do we have? We have Lena, who is probably downstairs, and many volunteers who support us with our activities. We, of course, run our events, workshops, and a mentoring scheme. He isn't here today, but we had an election over the festive break, and we have a new mentoring manager, Leo Mate. So if you're interested in mentoring, he will be the person who you will be dealing with. Our next event, we try to have monthly events. Our next event is on Thursday, the 21st of February, and that is looking at UX trends or some other stimulating topic. A big, massive thanks to Deliveroo. These events don't just come together, but one of the most important things is obviously a venue, and they have been brilliant. They provided the food and drink, a fantastic space. So many, many thanks to them. You can follow them on Twitter. And who's from Deliveroo tonight? If you could stick your hands up. So yeah, a big thank you to you guys. And we hope you'll have us back if we behave ourselves. And Future Heads, I can see Chris over there. Yep, two of you. Future Heads give us a lot of support throughout the year so we can keep these events going and also run things like social events, which are less formal. So I mentioned quickly at the start that we've been going for 20 years and UX has kind of grown a lot in that time, but that hasn't happened by accident. For UX to grow like it is and mature like it has, it's taken leadership. It's taken people like Rolf Mollick to kind of do a lot of work and prove the value of it. It's taken other evangelists to show that user needs really do present value for businesses. And it's taken all of us. So all of us have worked in teams where we've hopefully added value to products, we've made a better user experience, and we've improved the bottom line for a company. So everyone's a winner. And tonight, we're going to hear some stories. So obviously, building a team is tricky, leadership is tricky. You don't always get things right. Sometimes things don't work, but as long as you learn from them, that can feed in to your next project. So we have two speakers tonight. I'm going to hand over to Caroline, who has put this event together. Caroline.
Thank you. So we have two lovely speakers this evening. So we've got Sam Davies, who's going to be sharing some amazing stories of leadership. And we've got Charlotte, who's actually from Deliveroo, and she's going to be sharing some insight on how she's built the amazing research team here at Deliveroo. And this is going to be awesome. And the reason we put the event together like this is because we're hoping that there'll be a little something for everyone. So we're hoping that if you are in a leadership position and you're someone that's growing teams and leading teams, that you'll be able to learn from these amazing guys. And if you're more junior, that you'll be able to kind of pick up on, this is what they mean. This is what they want me to do, and this is what we're doing. So this is what we're really looking forward to tonight. And I also have some really exciting health and safety briefing. Which I've got to read out to you. So the fire exits are clearly marked using the green ceiling-mounted signs, and the security guards will be working as fire wardens. So if there is a fire if there is a fire alarm, it's a real fire, because there's no drills planned. I think probably everybody's found the loos, but there's some over there, and the security people will help you with that. In terms of restricted areas, Deliveroo would like everybody to stay in this sort of area because obviously there are workstations around. And one of the core things about that is please don't take photographs of anywhere outside of this area. Sound all right? Awesome. Now that is done, and I think I've ticked that box, I am going to hand over to Sam. So big round of applause for Samantha. Chris, have you got the clicker?
Thank you. Cool. Let's see how this works. Yes, it's working. Great. Hi, everyone. We're going to go straight into a story. So imagine this, right? I'm 3 months into a new role at a large corporate financial company, and a director of product's been brought in to completely transform the company and to go from a waterfall model to agile delivery teams that are product-led. So he's gone and hired a whole bunch of product managers, and the design team that's been sitting together, working together for a really long time, don't really like the change, right? So as part of his move, he says, right, we're going to move offices. The current setup was that all of those different teams were sitting together, and he wanted people to be sitting within their agile delivery teams. So they open up a building next door. There's 3 floors, desks scattered all over the place, and not a very organized, what's the word I'm looking for? There's not a very organized system behind it, right? So the morning of the move, all the designers turn up, and the product director isn't there, and the person who's supposed to be coordinating the move isn't there either. The designers start looking around. They find one of the floors empty with a whole bunch of desks, and it's quite a cozy looking area. So they think to themselves, hey, we're going to go and set up here. There are stickers on some of the desks downstairs where their names were and where they were supposed to be sitting, but they decided that they wanted to stay together and stay there because the director of product hadn't really explained to them what the benefits were of moving to an agile model. So there they are, they settle, they get their pots of plants out and their fairy lights and get themselves really comfortable. And downstairs, the product managers are sitting on these islands of desks with not much team around them. So not really the best start to all of this. 2 days later, the product director turns up. The person who's responsible for the move or coordinating it seems to have disappeared. And he comes in and he sees all of these product managers sitting by themselves, right? So you can imagine that he wasn't best pleased. He walks up to the second floor where the designers were, sees them looking cozy, and then turns to them and goes, shouting, "What are you doing?" Everyone stops and looks at him. "Why are you sitting here?" he shouts, getting really, really red in the face. "You need to be downstairs. If you're not downstairs by the end of the day, everyone's fired." So everyone stops, looks at him, and down he goes. So the designers pack up their stuff, go downstairs, take the time to find their stickers with their desks, and they sit down. What do you think happened next? Well, rumors of his behavior started circulating, right? I wasn't actually in the room upstairs when this happened, but I heard the noise, the commotion from downstairs, and I heard a lot of, the thoughts afterwards, right, and the reactions from people. And what happened after that was rumors of other unsavory behavior started circulating. So it wasn't just about this incident. Apparently there had been some other ones as well. And one by one, the company started hemorrhaging people. And what was interesting, it wasn't necessarily directly within his team and his line of command, as it were, but it was in the slightly, the next layer of people. And why was it? Like I started reflecting about it. It wasn't because people were afraid of him. It was because of what his behaviors represented. It was because of what he had, the message he was saying by shouting at people that were, under him in the line of command. And what happened in the next few months is the environment got really, really toxic. So toxic that I didn't feel like I could do my job. Part of a user researcher's role is to build bridges, right? Is to be collaborative. And if you've got someone like that, you just can't do that. So I left, lots of people left, and then eventually, about a year later, he was made redundant too. Oh, I say too, he was made redundant. So why am I telling you this story? Well, the obvious point is not to shout at people to get your way, right? But it goes far beyond that. It's also about what his behavior represented, as I said before. By behaving in the way he did, by creating this hierarchy, he was saying that it was okay to treat people a certain way. And then the less obvious point that maybe you might not take from this is the effect it had on people looking at leaders and looking at leadership. And when I started reflecting about it and how I felt, the one lesson I took away was how I did not want to behave one day when I was a leader. Because the leaders of today inspired the leaders of tomorrow, right? So it makes you think, what kind of leader do I want to be? What kind of example do I want to set? What kind of stories do I want people to be saying about me when I become a leader? So dramatic story out the way, I got your attention. Hi everyone, I'm Samantha. I'm a user researcher. I thought I'd introduce myself now. So I've been a user researcher for a little while. I've had the privilege of working in lots of different types of environments. In my time as a researcher, I've been in really big corporates. I've been in startups. I've worked as a full-time employee. I've worked as a contractor. I've worked agency. I've worked in-house. Don't mean to humble brag. It's not the point. It was more to say that I've been lucky to have exposure to a lot of different types of environments, lots of different structures, lots of different organizations, and under a lot of different types of leaders and leadership. I joined Monzo, the bank, about full-time a year and a bit ago as the very first researcher. When I joined, there were 4 designers, and then me. And then in that time, in about a year and a half, we've gone through a huge phase of hypergrowth. We're now over 650 people. We've got about 15 designers. And recently, we hired a couple more researchers, and we're looking for more, if anyone would like to join. And when Caroline asked me to put together this talk, I was thinking about leadership and what it meant to me. And as a new leader, I've been doing a lot of reflecting about what leadership means. And I watched some videos and talks, and I've read a lot of books and things and spoken to a lot of people who are leaders themselves. And so I decided to put together a series of stories and lessons and sort of takeaways that I've taken as a sort of a new leader. And what I really realized about leadership is it's incredibly personal, and because everyone's journey to leadership is really based on their own experiences, right, and what they've learned. So there might be some things I share today that some of you think, oh yeah, I knew that already, but hopefully there'll be some new things for you. So I thought about all the leaders I've worked with, directly and indirectly over the years, and I've, as I said, put together a short collection of things that I've learned. They're mostly from Monzo because of the availability bias. I'll share some of those now, starting with when I first joined Monzo. So I first joined Monzo in October in 2017. And as I mentioned, I was the first researcher. And with that came a lot of pressure, because I felt not only the need to prove myself as a professional, but also to sort of prove the value of research. Well, not necessarily the value, because I think they understood it, but to prove what more we could do than just usability testing or exploratory research. Our head of design decided to also hire someone else that had a slightly specialist skill set. And it was a bit of an experiment to see if they could sort of supercharge what design was doing and take it to the next level. And about 4 or 5 months in, I started to realize that things with this person weren't working out. They were trying different things, and you could see like some of the things that he was producing didn't quite seem right. And then from one day to the next, he was gone. And the effect on the team was really dramatic, because we were still so small. I remember thinking that my job was at risk, because he had such a specialist skill set and it didn't really seem to work. I immediately thought, well, I've got a specialist skill set. What if it doesn't work with me? What are the criteria that are being used to assess me? And I got super worried, and it triggered like a really, really bad phase of imposter syndrome. And the effect on other people was quite dramatic as well. Like, they were pretty worried, and there was a lot of people talking about like their own fears and whether they were safe. And from the outside, it looked like he had left from one day to the next. But really, it was only later that I learned that actually this has been a process that had been going on for a little while, right? And what I didn't understand is that our manager didn't really have a choice in the way that it was handled, right? Because if he told the team what was happening, and the issues that were concerning this individual, he'd be sort of breaching some privacy for this individual, right? He'd be telling people about these concerns that didn't really affect the rest of the team. But by not telling the team, from the outside, it looked like it'd been really sudden. And in an environment of radical transparency, which is how we operate at Monzo, where the burden is on secrecy, that's really, really challenging. So that was my first lesson, that leaders have to make really difficult choices and determine what happens next in life, right, and who gets affected and how. And there's almost never a perfect answer. It's always about trade-offs and deciding which lever you're going to pull at what time and when. If we kept the person who wasn't contributing in the way we needed them to, it would have sent one kind of message. Remove him, and it sends another kind of message. So what do? There's no easy choice, right? Neither one is actually a really great decision, right? Or an easy choice, rather. And you have to decide who wins and who goes home. A couple of months after our colleagues left, I went through a really deep personal crisis. So as well as this burden of imposter syndrome and the pressure I felt to prove myself, someone very close to me passed away. I was legally tied to the person, and if anyone has suffered a bereavement of someone that you're close to in that way, you will know that it's not just about the grief. There are months, sometimes years, if there's disputes between people who are still alive, of admin. And it can take a really long time to deal with the solicitors and all of that. So if you can already imagine the pressure of feeling like I needed to perform at work, and then that, on top of it, the amount of mental headspace it was taking was absolutely exhausting. And I also had it in my head that performance was linked to my ability to carry everything on me, to cope with everything that life was throwing at me, not just what I was doing at work. I couldn't separate the two. So months after the bereavement and months after I'd been coping with all of this, I decided to finally tell my manager. I didn't actually tell him how much I was struggling at the time because I thought he'd, find me out and all the stuff that goes with that, right? And when I finally told him that I was coping better and here's all the things I was doing, his reaction really surprised me. He listened to me really intently, and then he went on to share his own story of a phase that he went through when he was dealing with stress and how much he struggled. And I felt relieved. I felt so relieved, and I felt instantly more connected to him. And it turns out vulnerability and connection are a thing. So at Monzo, all managers have to go through EQ and empathy training. And it was just a few weeks ago when I was on the training workshop that I learned about Brené Brown. And she's this incredible researcher and storyteller. If you listen to a video, she describes herself that way. And she researches shame as an emotion. I won't go into the ins and outs of it, but watch her talk. It's absolutely amazing. And she basically talks about vulnerability and how vulnerability is the antidote to shame and loneliness, and it creates connection between people. So this was my second lesson, that showing vulnerability can actually create connection, and there's strength in that. And it's not just me, right? In this workshop that I was in, the empathy and EQ one, there was another manager, Jack, who manages some of our customer sports colleagues. And he recalled a time when Tom, our co-founder and CEO, was at the all-hands meeting on a Wednesday. We have one every Wednesday. And Tom had talked about how he was managing his stress and anxiety. And I remember that night, well, that evening. It was like almost a year ago. And Jack sat there and told us about how Tom was telling him this, and the fact that Tom told him this made him feel inspired. It made Jack feel like he could be infallible. It made Jack feel like he could have bad days and still do amazing things. So that was really nice. And of course there's a limit, right? As a leader, you don't want to be sharing every single fear and anxiety with your team because you don't want them to worry. But there's still this point about connection. Which segues nicely into my next point. Who here's heard of Project Aristotle that Google ran? Can I see a show of hands? A few of you? Okay, cool. So Google ran a study in 2012 to understand what were the things that made teams really efficient. And the study took place over many years. They had over 180 teams they looked at, and it being Google, they had reams of data, right, that they could analyze. They looked at locations, they looked at the makeup of a team, they looked at what they were doing, everything. And what they realized is it wasn't to do with who was in the teams, it was to do with how the teams worked. What really mattered were, they distilled it down to, I think it was 5 or 6 different variables, the top one being psychological safety. So what does that mean? Well, basically it means that teams where people feel like they're psychologically safe work better together. And psychological safety means that they feel like they can express themselves without fear of shame or ridicule. So it means that they feel like they can share whatever they want. They can bring their whole selves to work if they want to, and their colleagues will support them. So I mentioned vulnerability before as a way of creating connection. What it also does is establish a norm of acceptable behaviors in a group. It tells people that they can be themselves, right? And allowing people to be themselves fully is something we do really well at Monzo, which I'm proud of. So I'm going to share some examples. This is one of my favorite ones. So this is an example of what happens if you type guys in Slack. And it can be in any channel, or this is a message to myself. So one of our designers actually created this when she joined Monzo, and the team was still very small, and she was one of the first women on the team. So every time the word guys comes up, you get a replacement, a suggestion of a replacement. So it can be everyone, it can be folks, it can be peeps. There's so many of them, I forgot. And to people who you're not used to it, it can feel like a really small, pedantic thing, right? But imagine that you're the first woman in that team. And Monzo, that was the case, right? When Monzo started, there was only men. And then you're the first woman, and someone comes and goes, right, guys, should we go and get some pizza? You just don't feel like you're being included in that. So we try and avoid any non-inclusive language. It sounds like a small thing, but it has such a large impact on the individual. And we've had discussions when new starters join and they type something, in the general channel, and there's 500 people, and then they feel a bit embarrassed, and should we remove it for them? But we thought that's a really small amount of embarrassment for them, for something that actually makes a really big impact on someone else. So why not change, right? Another thing that we have, which I really like at Monzo, is a mental health Slack channel. There's a lot of people who are part of the channel, and we've had everyone from the C-suite all the way down to frontline customer operations who share personal struggles and struggles that they have within their family, so family members who've been affected by mental health issues, and ways to cope with various things, basically. And I've been really blown away by how open everyone feels and how they feel they're able to share. And the support that's been offered has been absolutely incredible. We even have mental health first aiders within Monzo. So people who are trained in mental first aid in the same way first aid for physical ailments, right? So if someone comes in the office and they're having a panic attack, or if there's something that means that they can't feel like they can do their work, there's someone there to support them. There's a whole team of people they can support. They can @Slack HFA, and there's people on hand immediately. Here's another one, which is, I really, really like this one. So we have a channel called Gratitude in Slack. We do everything on Slack. And this is a lovely message from Vicky. I did check with her before sharing. She's fine with me sharing this post of her name and a photo. And Vicky had a hard time over Christmas because her mum was really poorly. She's one of our EAs, executive assistants, so she told her team, and her team divvied up all of her responsibilities, and then they made sure everything was covered, and then they sent her a bunch of flowers at home and checked in with her to make sure she was okay. What a lovely thing to do, right? So when she came back to work, she felt like she was, part of, maybe a family is a strong word, but she didn't feel like she needed to worry about herself, her performance, her role, right? She felt like she could just come straight back in. And that makes her perform. It makes her able to do her job from day one, again, as she's back. Here's another one from Minnie, who's one of our frontline customer operations people who works in Cardiff. So here she's really happy because she received a handwritten card after her 1-year anniversary at Monzo. And everyone receives these. So again, it's a really small thing, but it's a small gesture that someone's taken the time over doing, and it makes you feel like you're not just clocking into a 9 to 5 every day. So this was my next lesson, right? People thrive in a safe, inclusive environment, and it's down to leaders to create that environment. You need to be mindful of the people you hire, of how you hire, your hiring practices. You need to think about your socials that you're creating, that you're doing. So it's not always, booze on a Wednesday night, because people who have families can't do that, right? Or maybe people don't want to drink, and if you put them in an environment where it's forcing them to drink, they don't feel like they can go there. It's about creating rituals where everyone can express themselves in the way they want to. It's about creating a feedback culture, so people feel like they can feedback the things that aren't working, which is one of the pillars at Monzo, and it's really great. So a few months after that, so we kept growing, and we hired a couple more researchers, and my role started changing. I became less and less hands-on, and I learned the difference between coaching and mentoring. So show of hands, who knows the difference between coaching and mentoring? Okay, great, not that many, because I didn't either. So I didn't when I joined Monzo. Coaching is helping someone get their own answers. So it's where you have confidence that they know how to get to something. And rather than giving them the answers, you allow them to find the answers themselves. Mentoring is where someone has a skills gap, so they won't know the answers. And you give them the answers, so they can then go and do the thing. All right. So as I became less and less hands-on, I had to get really good at understanding when to coach and when to mentor, and to see when it was that I could help people get the answers they needed themselves rather than giving it to them. And when I was 22, I used to have a boss who micromanaged me. It was awful. So I knew I really didn't want to be that kind of manager. And getting good at mentoring and coaching and understanding when it's the right time to apply which is a really tough skill. And it's one I've needed to learn. This is an example of kind of coaching and mentoring that I'm doing. So a bit of context to this. This is an invitation to a workshop that I run with all of our product managers and all of our product designers, and it's called How to Ask Better Questions. And what it is it's some basic training for all of our product managers. We also have what we call scouts, so people who are business analysts, for example, or have a product background who might go and explore ideas. And during this session, so it's a 2-hour session, what I teach them is the basics of cognitive psychology and the basics of user research. And the reason for doing this is really, again, to help people understand how to work with user research. And something I've seen in a lot of companies is researchers and research teams can end up almost creating this wall around themselves, right? They don't want to share their practices. They don't want anyone else to do research in case they feel like it somehow devalues them. And I think it actually does the opposite, because when people want to do their own research, they'll do it regardless. And if you don't empower them to do it properly, or if you don't teach them the guardrails of what good research can be and what good research and bad research look like, then it can, I think, ends up being even worse than if you actually give them a bit of training. So this is, again, part of trying to coach and mentor people and become less hands-on, and rather than giving people the answers, helping them get to the right answers themselves. So this is my next lesson, working out how to scale my impact. I thought when I first started working in the field that if I got really, really good at what I did and just focus on me and become absolutely amazing, that would be enough. But it's not enough. If you want to progress, you have to understand your impact, and then you have to understand how you can scale that. So for me, that meant deconstructing what I do, and then, as I said, teaching others through coaching, through mentoring. And I'm also needing to delegate parts of my role, which I'm really bad at doing. But it's been really challenging, and I'm still learning how to do it. All right, so a few months later, back to my story, the Monzo turned 3 years old. Fun fact, most people at Monzo are pretty young. They're in their mid-20s, so the parties can be a little bit wild. At the end of one of the parties, some sort of stuff that shouldn't have happened, and some furniture got broken. And the next morning, came into the office, and our head of people had left quite an angry message on the Slack channel. So there's lots of reactions to it, and in parallel to that Slack message, there was a message happening, a thread, in the manager's channel about how we were supposed to deal with it. So people were talking about the consequences, they were talking about how people needed to be accountable, but it was really challenging because Monzo had never gone through anything like this before. We just had a good 30 or 40 people join the company, so we'd had a bit of a growth spurt. And we knew it was a one-off. So amongst all the messages was this one. I won't read the whole thing because you can see it's really, really long, but I just wanted to pull out the 2 sections in red. I'll read them out. So the first bit is, these were acts of carelessness and complacency rather than maliciousness. I've worked in malicious places and we are so far removed from that. That's a good thing. We shouldn't forget that. And the second bit, I'll close by saying, yes, this is terrible, but I don't think it's indicative of our culture or even emerging trends within our culture. This is Yehudi who wrote this. He's our head of complaints. He's amazing with words. And what was amazing from this, for me, was that Yehudi was able to really distill like what happened in a way without dramatizing it. And he really made this point that the way that we dealt with this incident was going to set a precedent, because it was the first time that we had anything like this. So it's really important that we dealt with it in a really mindful way. And as a result of the way it was handled, the people who were responsible for the mess that was caused and the damage to the property came forwards, apologized to the cleaner, put some money together, and then the whole thing was resolved really nicely. And nothing like this has ever happened again. So this was where I learned one of my next lessons, which was about Hanlon's razor, which is a saying that reads, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by ignorance. In other words, some bad things happen not because people have bad intentions, but because they didn't think through it properly. And again, as you step into a position of leadership, you have to consider these things, right? And you have to think about the way you're going to carry through with things that happen like this. Words. It's trade-offs again. Here's another example of some of the really nice things I like about our culture. So we had just grown from about 150 people at this point and added about 100 or 200 people, and we'd noticed that, like the guys thing, another word that we try to avoid at Monzo is the word resources instead of the word people. And this is our head of engineering, Ollie, who wrote in the general channel that we don't call people at Monzo resources, we call them people, because they are. And then a few days later, Hugo, who's our head of design, posted in, again, the general channel about Lattice. So Lattice is a tool that we use to collect feedback and give feedback, and also to write all our goals. And he made what I think is a really valid point, which is that about 30 people hadn't put a profile photo in Lattice, and that it made it seem like they didn't care. They didn't care about their profiles, about getting feedback or giving feedback, which I think is a really good point. And because feedback is such a pillar to our culture, I think it made complete sense to address it like this. And this is the point, right, the takeaway from all of this, that leadership needs to reinforce culture every single day. We always talk about leadership acting in times of crises, and of course, like that's important, right? Like with the event and like the way it was handled. But it also comes in those little lessons that happen all the time that we might not think about, but that leaders need to think about, because they're the ones who are nudging the ship in the right direction, right? They're the ones who are deciding where we go. And if you let those little things slide too much, and that changes it without you even realizing it, so you need to be aware of it. And it comes back to my first story, right? The director who got angry and shouted. To this day, I think, like I said, I think it was less about his behavior and more about what it represented. So leadership needs to direct that. So as Monzo grows and continues to grow, I've noticed a change in myself and in people in my team as well. There's this real sense of like nervousness sometimes that comes with how fast the company is shifting and changing around you. Last year, someone shared an article by Molly Graham called Giving Away Your Lego and Other Commandments for Scaling Startups. And in that article, she talked about how people get really comfortable with their roles, right? Because it defines them. And in the same way, when you give them a Lego, they love playing with their Lego. And she said, you need to give that stuff away. You need to find someone else who can do that role for you, so you can run towards the other Lego. There's always stuff to do in scaling startups. There's always so much work that you don't need to stick to it. You don't need to hold on to it. Actually, if you give it away to someone else who can do it and move on to something else, that can allow you to grow faster, right? That gives you a lot more opportunity. which I really liked. Molly Graham, for context, she was at Facebook and Google when they went through their phases of hypergrowth. And she's got a bunch of other commandments in there, of which one is to manage the nervousness that other people can feel. I strongly recommend it if you're in a growing team. And then I wanted to share an observation based on a lot of other places I've worked at. Not so much Monzo, because well, not at all Monzo actually, because we've got really great relationships between the teams. But I've seen this, so product teams and UX teams fighting over kind of who gets the decision over the product, who gets to do what, using user research as a way to try and justify decisions. And I've seen it mostly in companies where they're going through a really big digital transformation. This is from Melissa Perry, by the way. She's on Twitter, follow her, she's a great product manager. And I just saw this, and it rang so true to me, because I feel like sometimes when you look at this, like this happens, it just feels to me like people have missed the point. They've missed the big picture. It shouldn't be about this, right? It should be about what your product is trying to do. It should be about the problems you're trying to solve. And leadership should be stopping this sort of stuff from happening instead of contributing to it. You can't lose sight of the bigger picture, I think. Like, if you're a leader and you're helping steer that ship, you've got to remember what it is you're there doing, like what you're doing this for. And you need to bring everyone along with you and inspire them towards the vision. And I wanted to finish with this quote, which I just absolutely loved. I'll read it out. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. That's it from me. We're hiring all across the board, across design and user research. If you're interested, please come and have a chat with me afterwards. That's it. Thank you for listening.